Okay, thank you everyone. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. This webinar is titled Making Sense of the Census. And this is one of the initiatives of the Islamic Center of Greater Cincinnati's Civic Engagement Committee, who are charged with reaching out more to the community and to take a more active role in our whole society. And our tagline for the civic engagement is, and the center is uplifting lives as a model Muslim American community. So thank you again for joining us, especially during the hard times here relating to the famous virus. We're doing what we can, and we're following up on a joint seminar that was also provided by our two guest speakers today that was given in early March. That was also similarly titled Making Sense of the Census. And this is an initiative. Our speakers will be talking a lot more about this, so I won't defer too much on that. But we have as our first speaker today, Carolyn Tepe, who is with the U.S. Census Bureau. Her organization is charged with reaching out to all the communities in the U.S. so that people are encouraged to fill out the census form, and she'll explain some of the reasons why. But the bottom line is that it affects very much our community in terms of the finances that comes from the federal government for a wide range of social services and other human services, including healthcare, representation in the Congress, etc. So the second speaker that we'll have on the second part of the talk is Sister Amina Barhumi, who is the Director of Outreach at CARE Ohio. They have taken also a very active role because this is important to all communities, and especially as we're talking today, our Muslim community to make sure that everyone fills this out. So I'll turn it over at this time to our first speaker, again, Carolyn Tepe with the U.S. Census Bureau, and she'll be giving us some very important information as it relates to the census. Carolyn.
Thank you, Rick. Thank you, everyone, for having me here today to talk about the 2020 census. I'm sorry I can't see everyone's face. With census regulations, we're not allowed to be on Zoom calls video-wise, but thanks to some technical assistance, I do have a slide presentation I'm going to go through today. So we'll start with the second slide, actually, in the presentation, which is the agenda. And what we're going to talk about today is a little bit about the goal of the 2020 census, why we do a decennial census in the United States, how it has changed for the 21st century with this 2020 census, and then how you as a community can help make sure the census is done accurately for your community, and then encouraging you and helping me encourage others to respond to the census now. So the next slide, it will start with the decennial census goal. Is our mission to be the nation's leading provider of quality data about its people and economy. We like to believe at the census that we're the gold standard for statistical data about the United States. And our plan for the 2020 census is to meet our goal, which is to count everyone once, only once, and in the right place. In the next slide, we're going to talk about, it's in the Constitution. It's Article 1, Section 2 of the U.S. Constitution that mandates that we enumerate everyone living in the United States with every 10 years. And I want to put stress on that it's everyone living in the United States. We'll go over a little bit of brief history in the next slide, which is in 1790, we conducted our first census. It was conducted by then Secretary of State Thomas Jefferson. It was done on horseback. We had 3.9 million people in the United States at that point, and it took about 9 months to complete. And then we jumped forward a couple hundred years, and we started getting a little more technologically advanced. So we started a mailback feature. Then we started doing electronic data collection and using the telephone in the 90s. And then in 2010, we eliminated what used to be known as the long form. Anyone who's done the census way back, it used to be a really lengthy questions, and we're now down to 10 short questions. And then now for the first time ever, you'll be able to respond online. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. So my next slide talks about how we use census data, and there are 4 ways I'm going to go over today, but they are apportionment, redistricting, funding, and planning. So my next slide talks about apportionment. And apportionment is the redistribution of our 435 congressional seats in Congress across the United States based on population. In Ohio in 2000, we had 18 seats. However, after the 2010 census, we lost 2 seats, bringing us to our current total of 16 congressional seats in Ohio. It is our hope with the 2020 census that Ohio does not lose that. However, there's always population shifts throughout our country, and then there's the potential that those seats would go to other southern states, which are seeing a higher growth rate than ours. The next slide talks about redistricting. After each census, state officials use those results to redraw the boundaries of those congressional seats, and they often use that data for state legislative district redrawing and adapting population shifts within the state, and that affects where funding goes, which leads me into my next slide, which is funding. So funding, it is about $675 billion every single year that is used of federal dollars that are used to support state community initiatives. And some of those are in education, such as Head Start, or in our public schools, such as IDEA, to unemployment insurance, environmental things like statewide grants, public safety, planning for things like a pandemic on our healthcare systems, and planning for care for people that don't have health insurance. It's also for food supplemental programs known as SNAP. And it also, there's child abuse and neglect. It's also Pell Grants for higher education. So it's a lot of things that get paid for through these dollars. Next slide is planning. Census data is also used greatly by planning. So it's whether residents who are doing community initiatives, quality of life. It's used for businesses decide to where build factories or stores or create jobs based on the demographics of the population there. What's the educational attainment of that area? What is the types of people that live there? It helps businesses decide what kinds of foods that are in grocery stores. I make a joke sometimes in my presentations about it depends whether Depends are on the end caps or diapers are in the end caps. So it kind of makes communities be more reflective in their businesses. Local government officials use this for public safety and planning new schools and hospitals, in road development, and where they're going to put dollars for repaving roads. Real estate developers use this to decide where to put homes and where to invest in communities. The next slide, I just want to talk a little bit about how we designed our 2020 census and how that is looking. So we first, a fact that a lot of people don't know about the census is it's not only a count of the number of people living in the United States, but it's also a count of where people live and the houses that they live in and the housing that they live in. So we started in 2018 through 2019 about working with local communities to identify housing changes, what homes were vacant, which ones had been torn down, what new housing had been built, and establishing where to count. Then we've been moving into a motivate people to respond phase, and that started in late 2018 all the way through 2019 and now to today. In March, mid-March, actually March 12th, we began counting the population, and we will be releasing census results to the president on December 31st of 2020 and redistricting to the states on April 1st of 2021. However, because of COVID, which I'll go over some of this a little later in the presentation, those dates may be pushed forward, but they need congressional approval, which we are currently waiting on. The reason I'm here today is to ask you, next slide, I'm sorry, is we need your help to help us count the hardest to count. And the hardest to count based on history is renters, highly mobile people, young adults, low income, young children under 5, we estimate that we missed about 1 million children under the age of 5 during the 2010 census. So this has been a very focused area for us. We've been working closely with schools and so forth with this. And then non-English speakers, people in the LGBTQ+ community, racial and ethnic minorities, and the mentally and physically disabled. So we at the census have been looking at ways we can increase participation by reducing barriers. And the most ways we want to address people's individual needs about concerns about data privacy and confidentiality, fear of repercussions, a general distrust of government, and a feeling that it doesn't matter if you're counted. And we hope by addressing these concerns with individuals, we're able to increase everyone's understanding about how the census benefits everyone and secures futures for our community. One of the first things we want to share is that the census is easy. It's online. It's available by phone, which I'll share that number with you at the end of the presentation, by mail, and also with non-response follow-up. That had originally been scheduled to start in May, and that has been pushed out, which I'll share with you a little bit later. We did send out invitations into the mail on the 12th through the 20th of March, and everyone should have received an invite. Some of those did include a paper questionnaire, and some of those just encouraged families to go to the 2020 census website. And then you received a reminder letter if you didn't respond, and then a reminder postcard. And then anyone who hadn't responded by March 8th received a paper questionnaire. And then April 20th through the 27th, we did a final reminder postcard. We also will be doing another reminder postcard to anyone that lived at a PO box in the coming weeks. Just wanted to share with you what the paper questionnaire kind of looked like visually, but I know Amina is going to go over it more extensively with you. We also have this flyer that's available on our census website, which I'll make sure Rick sends out to anyone who would like it after this. But any of our surveys that we do, and there is many surveys that the census does, we always produce something called Why We Ask, and it explains each of the things we're asking information on and why it's important for that to be asked for the 2020 census or any of our census surveys. The census, next slide, is accessible for everyone. You can do it online or by phone. And so there's different ways that we've adapted our questionnaire to fit anyone's needs. Next slide, we talk about safety. So safety is that we are not allowed to share any of your personally identifying information with anyone. And when we say anyone, anyone outside of the census. So we are not allowed to share that information with anybody at the FBI or ICE or local police departments. It is only restricted to statistical data that we can share, which is data that we have available on our website for anyone to see. And it's about down to what we call a census tract, which represents approximately 2,000 to 8,000 individuals in a census tract that we represent in there. So it is unable to be traced back to individuals within that census tract. Our data is encrypted and aggregated before it's released, so nobody can figure it out, and it can't be used against you in an agency or a court, and it cannot be released for 72 years. Some of you may be aware of programs like Ancestry.com, where you can do genealogy searches, and this kind of information is what is used, but it cannot be released for 72 years. So our next release will be the 1950 census data, and that will be released in 2022. All census workers, including myself and anyone you would come in contact with the U.S. Census Bureau, has signed taken an oath of confidentiality for life. And if we were to violate that, that would be 5 years in prison and a $250 fine. Next slide. One of the things I wanted to share with you today, this is a screenshot of Butler County. So there's a website you can go to that's called Hard to Count 2020 Census. And there you can look individually into, so each of these little blocks that are different colors, and you can kind of see the little white lines, are individual census tracts in Butler County. Currently, as of 7/9, so over the weekend, Butler County's response rate was at 69%. In 2010, their self-response rate was around 72%. So we're getting very close to our 2010 census rate at this time. So the darker blue areas are responding higher. So if you see a really dark black blue on your screen, those are areas that have responded 85% or greater. But if you see the light orange areas, like in Middletown, Hamilton, on some of the lighter blue areas, those might be in the 30 to 40% response rates have responded, households that have responded. The next slide shows you Warren County and gives you an idea. In Warren County, the response rate is 75.5%. So they are just 1% behind their 2010 rate. Next slide. So COVID has obviously impacted us. I remember on March 12th, I was standing in Butler County's lobby for their lobby offices, all excited that they were opening a census response center in their lobby that was going to run through the end of April and possibly the end of May. And it basically was shut down that day. So with COVID, things started getting a little more out there, and everything was kind of shut down and slowed. So that was where we started. At that time, everything pretty much froze. We were doing update leave, and that was delayed. It has been completed as of now. And update leave is any house with a PO box address instead of a physical address that their mail is delivered to. And then we moved to pushing back. Everything got pushed back about 3 months. So we started doing our update enumeration operation back on June 14th. We will be doing a population count. Population experiencing homelessness was supposed to take place March 30th through April 1st. It is now going to take place on September 22nd through the 24th. Our transitory relations have also been pushed back. Next slide. Our soft launch of non-response follow-up, so knocking on people's doors, actually began across the United States in the last couple of weeks. I think that mostly this coming week is when that's going to start. We don't have any in our exact area right now doing that, but that will resume completely as of August 11th, that we will begin doing non-response follow-up. But I do want to let you know there will be a little bit of soft launch, so we might do some door knocking before the August 11th date in Ohio. We just don't know exactly what date that'll start. We have started looking at mobile question assistance sites. We got some information on that actually on Friday of this week. We are currently looking at locations throughout Ohio to be able to go to. We currently are looking at libraries and grocery stores first, and then we'll go out into the community, such as the Islamic Center of Greater Cincinnati, and so forth. So we'll be working with those entities to try to set some of those up. The next slide I want to talk about is avoiding fraud and scams. We are out in your communities. All of our census takers should look like these individuals, and that they will have a black bag with a white banner. They will have a census phone or an iPad with them, and they will always have a federal ID badge with them, as you see in the picture here. Next slide. I did mention earlier we do lots of other surveys. One of them is the American Community Survey. Recently with COVID, we started doing what we're calling pulse surveys to the community, and they are also to the businesses. The pulse surveys, they have been out there. They have been calling people and leaving messages. And the message I always want to get across with that those surveys are different. They have a different purpose than the 2020 census does. And if you're one of the lucky individuals that's been asked to complete one of them, you still need to complete your 2020 census. And the next slide is, we do have all our census data available at data.census.gov. I encourage any of you to go there and look at the data to help you understand a little bit how data is shared not only with entities within the government, but with the community in general. We all have access to the same types of data, so you'd be able to see that there. And if you're unsure how to use it, we do have a Census Academy, which are online areas for you to learn about how to use census data. And what I'm asking of anyone on the call today to become is a census partner today, and that is to share census information on websites and your social media, whether it's Twitter or Instagram or any of those social media. And then to display and distribute census materials. And then one of the things I want to challenge all of you is something we're calling My Census Plus 10. And we're encouraging you to complete your census now and then ask 10 friends that you come in contact over the next week if they've completed their census, and if not, to encourage them to complete their census and then to pass it on to another 10 friends of theirs. The next slide is, this is our website, 2020census.gov. And you can see like the 2 green buttons that you can respond now there. I also want to let you know that we do have a 1-800 number, which is 800-44-330-2020, that you can go to and respond to the census by phone if you're not comfortable doing it online or don't have an internet connection. You can also return your mail ballot, your mail form if you still have it. And again, the 2020 census will be continuing to collect responses until October 31st of 2020. However, we would like people to respond now so that we don't have to show up at your doorstep in the coming weeks. And if I have any questions, I'm happy to take those. Or Rick, if you want to hold those till the end, I understand. Hello?
Rick, unmute yourself.
Unmute yourself, Rick. We cannot hear you.
Oh, 1 second.
Now we can.
Okay, all right. Sorry about that. But thank you very much, Carolyn, for the excellent presentation. And thank you earlier for your seminar that you gave at the center back in early March. That was most informative. So that was really impressive. And the more recent information, especially because of the COVID situation now, that's most helpful. And we will hold questions for the very end. I think that would be more efficient here. But I'd like to introduce our second speaker, Sister Amina Barhumi from CARE Ohio. She is the Director of Outreach. She was also, as I mentioned before, one of the presenters at our center in early March. And she is here to provide some additional perspective on the census and especially the importance for our community to participate in that. Sister Amina.
Yes, thank you so much, Brother Rick, and to the ICGC community for having me. I am sharing my slides. Do we see the slides okay?
Yes, we do.
Perfect,
Yes.
thank you.
Yes, we do.
Great. Thank you so much for having me. And thank you for highlighting this important topic in which it's very critical that particularly our Muslim community participates in the census and ensures that they count. I'm the outreach director at CARE Ohio, and I look forward to following this circumstance of COVID that we're able to meet again like we did a couple months back. So a lot of my first several slides is information that Carolyn so succinctly had shared, but I want to be able to highlight some things that are very specific to our Muslim community. And so the census is so critical, particularly the decennial census, is that as Muslims, we must say we count. And really regardless of our background, in our Muslim community, we have people who are recent immigrants, who have different visa statuses, who are citizens and non-citizens, asylum seekers, and even sometimes, friends that stay over other friends' house for an extended period of time. Everyone that is physically present must be counted. Sorry, give me a moment here. For some reason, I'm not able to move down the slide. Is it seen correctly? All right, there we go. And just as Carolyn had indicated, census data is being used all around us. And it's particularly critical because as the Muslim community, we are using from the resources, but if we do not respond to the census, the accuracy of the data is not one that reflects us. And so we have, this is a way to be able to make sure that we are participants in this process that's so critical. As Carolyn had mentioned, allocation of a large amount of budget, $675 billion, really shapes the future of our local communities and neighborhoods in which we are, at the receiving end of resources. And we want to make sure as Ohioans, as Muslim Ohioans, that there's fair representation, that legislative districts are drawn in a way that is accurate, and that Congress represents us. really what's important to highlight is why this is important for the Muslim community. It is estimated that there are around 200,000 Muslims living in Ohio, and all of which we are at the receiving end of some kind, services, social services, human services. And so we want to make sure that that the accuracy of the data that's received and the count is one that reflects our own experience and our uniqueness. And so I want to be able to take a step back before sort of delving in a little bit more into how to fill out the form and the recommendations that we have at CARE Ohio, and really is to be able to discuss what American Muslims look like. And this is based on a study that was done by the ISPU, and which had found that of all faith groups, Muslim Americans are the most ethnically and racially diverse, that there is no one ethnicity that is, is of the majority of the Muslim population, American Muslim population. That Muslims are the youngest faith group. Actually, a third of Muslims are under the age of 30. That half the Muslims are born in the United States, but that the immigration story is a significant part of our narrative. And that 18% reported low household income of $30,000 or less per year. And why this is so critical is because Carolyn, a little bit earlier, highlighted those that are hard to count. And I was able to go through at least 4 or 5 different criteria points that actually very much fit within our Muslim population. And so it becomes even critical because we have those that are immigrants within our community, very diverse, very young, that it becomes even more important to make sure that we fill out the census so that there's an accurate count of what Ohio looks like and what our neighborhood looks like. This is the same, the same study that was done, but if you look right at the top, it shows that Muslims are extremely diverse across the board compared to other faith groups. And so even highlighting even further why it is so important and critical for the Muslim community to be able to fill out the census. One of the things that Carolyn also mentioned that I very much appreciated being able to go to the census.gov website and be able to find out why different questions are asked and the historical context to them. And so I can't speak to why the race question was asked in the very beginning of when the census was rolled out in 1790. However, it is the case that now census data, particularly pertaining to the race question, is of critical importance. It ensures that equal opportunity is one that exists and is enforced. So the enforcement of non-discrimination education, the enforcement of non-discrimination in employment and the workplace, whether that be in federal agencies or by private employers, the enforcement of laws, regulations and policies against discrimination when one is applying for financial assistance. And so this really underpins the importance of ensuring that the data is accurate, that the data is up to date and complete, particularly for researchers who spend a lot of time in being able to find what are the problems that occur, particularly when it comes to discrimination, and advocacy groups and policymakers when trying to be able to come up with solutions. And as someone who works at CARE Ohio, our primary job is to be able to combat discrimination, which tells us even more so the importance of making sure that this data is accurate and represents those in the Muslim community. And just really quickly, as Carolyn had mentioned, there's 3 ways to complete the census: by mail, online, or by phone. Mailings look like this. Carolyn, what a great job the Census Bureau is doing. I've received 3 mailings I should have gone online in the very beginning. I do these presentations, but I was able to fill it out immediately. So further mailings are not sent out. And obviously we don't want to be able to be, waste government money. The online website looks like this, 2020census.gov. You press on respond now. And I want to be able to highlight here is that although you may not have a code that has come through the mail, you may still go online and click right under the login. If you do not have a census ID, click here. And the form online comes in many different languages. So if you're someone that prefers filling out a form in a different language, that is something that is available to as well. And this is the crux of the presentation that I'd like to highlight on this particular slide. CARE Ohio has come forth with a recommendation on the basis of other civil liberties or cultural organizations where we are making a recommendation for how to answer the race question. And I'll speak a little bit more detail about that and some of the details that underpin the reason why. But our recommendation is the following. Muslims are of a the Muslim faith group in the United States is extremely diverse. And again, highlighting some of the slides in the past, we want to make sure that there is accurate representation of this diversity across Ohio. So that it is accurate. And so the recommendation is if you are of African descent, to be able to check off, as you could see in orange, Black or African American, and write the country of origin. So say, for instance, you are Somali, Nigerian, Senegalese, that you write down the country of origin or your ancestry. If it is particularly if it is not available within these broader categories. Secondly, if you are South Asian or Southeast Asian, to check off other Asian and not Indian. So for instance, if you are Pakistan, unless you are Indian, but if you are Pakistani or Bangladeshi or Malaysian or Indonesian, checking off other Asian and writing down your country of origin and how you identify. If you are Arab or Iranian or Afghan, to check off some other race, which is essentially the other box towards the end, and write down your family's origin, whether that be Palestinian, Iranian, Afghani, Yemeni, Egyptian, etc. I'm going to go to the next slide to showcase how that would look like on the online form. The online form looks something like this, except it's you can scroll down. I have them here in 2 columns, but it's essentially the same thing. You may check off more than one ethnicity if you identify for more than one. But if you are African, South Asian, Southeast Asian, Arab, or Iranian, to write in how you identify or your country of origin. The Arab American Anti-Discrimination Committee, NAIC, the National Iranian American Council, all made these recommendations, and we are following along with them. So that way they're in uniformity, there's some sort of accuracy that everyone that identifies as a minority is filling out their form. The most important thing to recognize if you are of mixed race, to fill out the census as to how you identify yourself, and to write it in. So even if it's more than one hyphen, to write it in the box. And then check off all that apply, because you may fill out more than one of the boxes, including online. And then if there is no option for how you identify, making sure that you write it in. Why does that matter if you write it down? And this is really important. And I'll give you an example. For instance, I'm of Lebanese descent. My children are, half Lebanese, half Syrian. And because the recommendation, actually, if you look at the census form in parentheses under white or Caucasian, includes sort of a variation of Lebanese, Syrian, Iranian, I believe are some of the categories. However, my Lebanese heritage, or the way I identify, my experience is much different. I am not someone who has an experience that's white, nor do I, the services that I used, or whether they be social services or human services that I require, are going to be exactly the same. And so it's extremely critical for someone like me, or someone that identifies as a minority that's not included on the census, to make sure that the other box or other within the categories identified as racist, to check off other and write the full hyphenated country of origin or ancestry in. And that is the same for those that are Pakistani, Bangladeshi, Malaysian, Somali, Nigerian, etc. And it's really, you know, one of the reasons is it's very difficult to be able to determine when there is discrimination if there's undercounting. And so, you know, back to some of what our office works on is combating discrimination. And if some of the data that we're using is one where there's a little bit of whitewashing, so to speak, where those that identify in some of the categories are bulked into another. So if I am Pakistani, but it's bulked into Southeast Asian, then obviously the experience that I go through is not going to be one that is represented in the data. And really, data of minorities in the United States is extremely critical. And I will be sharing a little bit of how some of the changes in the census question actually relates to this. Just some quick pieces of information. This might not apply as much because college students are more than likely back home. However, students are frequently overcounted, but students must be counted if they reside on campus, where they reside, and where they are physically present. And oftentimes the universities themselves take it upon themselves to respond to the census on behalf of the students. But I think maybe Carolyn might have a little bit more information than me on that. Children, as Carolyn had mentioned, and as I mentioned, in terms of the Muslim population being one that is very young, it is very important because children are oftentimes undercounted. And so it's really important that if you have a child that was born April 1st, 2020 or later, that they are counted, counting your grandparents, your cousins, extended relatives, if they happen to reside physically with you for an extended period of time. Carolyn succinctly shared how security is handled and how information is kept secure and confidential within the Census Bureau. And I would just like to share that obviously as you know, identifying as Muslim, and particularly since our attendees are all Muslim, there's a lot of hesitancy, and rightfully so sometimes, for those that are marginalized to be fearful of sharing information with the government. But I will also say, as someone who works in a civil liberties organization, someone who's studying policy, how important it is to have accurate data, and how important and how even more so it is for those in the Muslim community to respond to this data to make sure that it is accurate. It has been used so far up until this point, and will be used for the intention of research, of planning, of coming up with policy solutions that are extremely critical for our Muslim community. I wanted to share with you, and I found this really interesting, is some of the comparison between 1790 and our census questions right now, 2020, in terms of the race question. If you could see here in terms of how the question was, so in 1790, the question that were asked on the race, you know, that Americans sort of recorded their race and ethnicity on the census form as free white males, free white females, and then the other categories that were relevant then. Obviously, slavery has been abolished, and we are that is extremely important. But you know, in the run up to the events that our country is going through, and the highlight that prejudices do exist, systemic prejudices do exist within our institutions, and particularly our government institutions, we are very lucky that there's a government agency like one that conducts the census that is able to identify race in varying categories, so we may better be able to come up with solutions to combat discrimination and racism where it happens. And so, I wanted to share this because I felt like this was something that was very eye-opening to me, but it also highlights for us our ability to be able to push the status quo a little bit further. And there are some organizations, including the Anti-Arab Discrimination organization, that has attempted to have a MENA category on the census this year, which did not come to fruition. And so part of our pushing to ensure that the other category and writing in the country of origin in the census is to be able to ensure that we are pushing the boundaries even in terms of how the census will look like come 10 years from now. What is the census data telling us? There was a recent article in the Brookings that had said that some of the data that actually has been recently released, even though it's not complete yet, not all of it, but there are some underpinnings that we are extremely a diverse nation, more so than even others had anticipated, or those that were doing projections had anticipated. And so as Muslims who are extremely diverse, even within our own community, it becomes critical to make sure that accuracy is represented in the 2020 data. And so that's it for my presentation. I suppose since the both of us are done, I believe that we will take questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Sister Amina. I think I'm unmuted this time. That was very enlightening. We'd like to open it up for questions now that I think people can send in by chat or other means. But I would like to start the questioning for Sister Amina here in regard to a little bit of the follow-up in terms of the risk of undercounting specific minorities. And two questions related to that. It's a lot of excellent information you gave, and how we that are filling out the census should be providing responses to be sure that we're most accurately counted in regard to the specific minorities. But the two questions are, number one, if someone has a special situation, are you available, or can they contact you for a little bit more guidance in regard to that aspect? And then the second question related to the same thing is, going forward, and again, it's not until 10 years from now when the next census occurs, but are there efforts underway to try to refine the categories so that it is not so tricky or difficult for certain minorities to be providing accurate responses? Thank you.
Of course, those are excellent questions. I'm actually going to share my email in the chat box. Anyone is free to contact me. I'll also share the work number. We're always available at CARE Ohio to be able to address any questions pertaining to how to fill out the forms and the recommendations for this year. I can also share the graphic with you, and then maybe with those that are attending, they can be emailed. In terms of your second question of efforts pertaining to the questions for the next decennial census, that's an excellent question. We were not part of the efforts of the Arab Anti-Discrimination League that was working towards adding a MENA category. My understanding is that they received some sort of okay, but again, the process by which questions are added is an elongated process that requires a lot of approval, which is ordinarily the case in any processes in the government. And maybe Carolyn can shed a little bit of light on that if she has any information. But at the current moment through CARE Ohio, there is not. But I will say, on the basis of my research, I'm extremely curious of the process, and even thinking about doing this as my capstone, because I do think that this is extremely critical for us to be sort of on the back end in making sure that we get ahead of the game, as you had mentioned. I will also say that depending on how people respond this time around, if there is a large portion of individuals that fill out other and write a country of origin, and it is of a large percentage of basically a minority response, then it will more than likely, you know, the response to that by the Bureau usually has been, if you see the timeline of how the questions have changed, they've been in response to the diversity in the census. And so, you know, the more that we can showcase that in our accuracy and not be undercounted by being part of a larger category, I think, you know, the better chance that we have to be able to change that. I appreciate the question.
Great, thank you very much. And I guess a good way to summarize the importance of it is that for minorities, and actually everyone, if we don't register properly, if we don't check in with the system, they won't know we're here. They'll pretend we're not here. We'll lose out on money for 10 years straight. And it adds up to a lot of funds that could have come to our communities to directly support us.
Exactly.
But I'll throw this part of this discussion as well in terms of looking forward to Carolyn. Maybe she has some other comment about forecasting what the future may look like, or additional commentary she might have about the select minority tracking.
So what I can add is that she's correct. Adding a question to the decennial census is a process. It's about a 2-year process that goes on. It is a process that reviews where is a data question focused more than anything. And so agencies would bring the question, any federal agency can bring the question forward to the census to have it added. And then that goes through a 2-year review process. I don't have the exact details in front of me to get more detailed than that at this time. But it is a process that we go through when we're looking at that. And so I encourage anyone to go to the 2020 or go to the census.gov website and look up that, and it can give you a very detailed answer process about that. Now, as I think, as also asked me to talk about the college question.
Yes.
And so I'll just speak real quickly on that one. Obviously, when we suspended operations for the 2020 census back in March, we were in the process of starting to count. And one of those populations that we do count are college students, and college students are counted at their usual residence, which during before pandemic, for COVID, would have been at college on April 1st. So they would have been residing at college on campus, and that's where they would have been counted. If they're counted, if they live in campus housing, in other words, as a parent, you're paying their rent or room and board to the university, they are being counted by the university, and that information is supplied from the university to ourselves. Universities had 4 choices to make in how they would report that information to us. Most of them decided to go with our new manner to respond, which was they were electronically sending us that information. And the information they supplied to this was information that was approved through the Federal Education Protection Act. And most of that was basic information that was available publicly through their student directory. And often it was just their name, date of birth, and then obviously their address, which was on the university campus. Some allowed for the race question to be answered, but not many. That wasn't an approved question. However, what some universities have done is that they are then sharing that piece of information. Like I know at Miami University, they were going to share that with the city because the city would lose out on being able to apply for grants or funding in the future, because a lot of grant funding is based on what populations you have within your community. And so that speaks very greatly to what Amina was explaining about doing policy change and things like that, and needing to know the demographics of different areas and communities, not only for receiving funds, but for applying for funds. So that's very important. So with COVID, college students still need to respond based on where they were living. So the universities took care of all of those kids that were living on campus, but it's the children, it's the young adults that were living off campus that have become a challenge for us at the census. So we'll be doing a special outreach during September. They won't be in their original housing, but they can reflect back. And so we'll be doing some outreach to them to encourage. We've also done a social media campaign encouraging students to respond through the universities, to go back and respond as households. We've asked them to complete the census by identifying what we call a census captain of their residents, because often they live in multi-units. So there might be 5 or 6 students living within one household. And so we've been doing some efforts like that around college students. Rick, I hope that answers your question.
Great. Thank you very much. That's most helpful. And Carolyn, you've been very reachable and supportive of other people having questions, not only at the previous seminars, but through emails. And we have included your email address for people that have other specific questions for them to follow up with you directly.
Perfect.
One
And you
of
can
the,
continue to do that.
Yeah, and one of the initiatives that you just informed us about recently was the fact that the U.S. Census Bureau is providing what you're calling mobile questionnaire assistance, I believe, where you will have make available small teams to come to different locations for helping people hands-on, essentially, fill out their questionnaire. Now, I know they have to fill it out, but in terms of the specific instructions that you're available for that. And I just wanted, I loop back for the center here to say, yes, absolutely, we would like to be making this available to our community. We will loop back with you in regard to what Fridays might work best going forward. And for us, it would be, of course, when we have our Friday Juma prayer, we do have small groups, obviously very distance conscious in regard to the COVID situation, but that might be one of the types of times that would be helpful to our center and people there. And of course, we'd arrange that in advance and make sure it was okay on your end. But did you want to comment about that program a little bit?
Right. So we're just launched this on Friday. Like I mentioned I think I sent my email on Thursday afternoon. So we're just starting this. My understanding is that each ACO, which is our area census offices, will be selecting sites each week based on how many trained staff they have available to go out. They will have iPads with them. However, we were intending to just pass the iPads to individuals, but with COVID, that's not going to be able to happen. So they have trained them and able to be actually data collectors, so they can ask the questions of people and fill it out with them on their iPads. We'll fill it out for them. Obviously, they've taken the oath, so they can collect information and then complete it for them, or just to help people walk through on their own personal devices, whether they have iPads with them or even in smartphones, so be able to do it through their smartphone themselves, or just answer any other general questions that they might have about the census, so they will be able to be on site. And yes, Rick, we'll work with you. I can't promise a date at this time. It's just we're trying to get a feel for what kind of demand there is out there for that. And then also it will determine based on the hotspots within Ohio too, as far as COVID goes and where we can go and when we can go. So we'll work together on that, and we'll work something out, Rick.
Great, thank you very much. And of course, this session is being recorded, so will be accessible by our community for some time, for those that might have missed it. And I don't see any separate questions that are coming in by the Zoom group chat, but I'm not sure if any of you, either Carolyn or Sister Amina, have received questions separately regarding your presentations.
I have not received questions on this particular session, but however, I've received a lot of questions, that same question that Carolyn has been able to help me answer. Actually, I had reached out to her. But on the basis of the recommendations that are being made in terms of how to answer the race question, the big question for those that come across this recommendation after they have been very timely in filling out their census very early on, is that they answered it in accordance to some of the, without basically recommendations or as to how they thought they should have filled it out. And so on that basis, what we are asking people to do is they still have the ability to go back online. And although they don't have a code to just press, that they don't have a code to refill out the form. And it is that final form that they fill out, the one that is counted, and it's please correct me if I'm wrong, Carolyn, but you had mentioned that a lot of the information that's provided is then corrected to make sure that whatever was the final basically response is the one that it goes towards the census. And maybe it's a little bit more complex of a situation, but there is the possibility to be able to change or alter a response. And maybe Carolyn can provide a little bit more clarity on that.
So they don't give us a lot of guidance on this exact answer, but I will say that yes, you can go back in and make a correction, whether it been that you didn't expect a child to be born before April 1st and they came on April 1st, whether it is a change in the race question. You can go back in and complete the census. If it doesn't allow you to use your code that you had before, which it should, I think, if it doesn't, then you can always select at the very bottom is I don't have that code. They'll input your address. It'll then match on the back end. And when they're cleaning data, yes, they will take the most recent submission or the latest submission, whichever way you want to word that, and they will use that as your submission. However, they may call you, and that's why the phone number is important on your response, so that they can call and confirm that without having to come out, that is your current. Now, they won't do that with everybody, but they will do that as a kind of a quality check, I guess you could say, that you might get called to double check your information.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Carolyn.
And I just do want to say that does happen even if you have done yours online initially. We do have a bit of quality control within the census, so we do follow up with some of ours, not only door to door, which I think there'll be less of that with COVID, but it is a possibility, but we definitely will be doing it via phone. So that is important for people to understand.
Great, thank you very much. I'll make a last call for any questions from our audience if they want to send those very quickly by chat. Okay, and in the meantime, I'll come back to the chat here in a second, but I wanted to be sure that the community is also aware of another event coming up next Sunday. This is an initiative also part of the civic engagement team at ICGC. It's titled Your Vote, Your Voice, Your Right. And of course, this is about the election coming up and the importance of registration and everything. The event is a webinar. It's Sunday, the 19th, that's next Sunday at 2 p.m. And as you can see on the flyer here, if you see it on your screen, it's an important panel discussion that will include a Q&A. The speakers are Marianne Penska. She is a board member of the Butler County Board of Elections. And from our community, one of the other board members or members of the ICGC Civic Engagement Team, Tarif Hurani. They will be chairing a joint panel discussion about the importance of the election, and of course, a lot of questions relating to getting our community motivated and educated about the importance of that. So please put that on your calendar. Again, it's next Sunday, the 19th at 2 p.m. And the flyer is attached or will be attached to the upcoming newsletter with the contact information, including the Zoom ID number. So with that, I don't see any other new chat questions that came in, but I would like to thank again our excellent speakers, Carolyn Tepe from the the Census Bureau. She has done a fantastic job, and Sister Amina Barhumi as well. Another excellent job, and really thank you so much for pointing out the importance of the census in general, and especially for our Muslim community, that we do it and we do it right, and to the benefit of not only ourselves immediately, but since this is a 10-year effort, this carries on for a long time. So here's our chance to really do it right. So again, thank you all for the your help and education, and your contact information is part of this video recording as well, so you may get follow-up questions from our community. But thank you again, and that concludes our session. Thank you for joining, everyone.
Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
Thank you.